Maybe I should have made clear this panel was to discuss COVID, not to give people COVID, and that's why we have such a small audience today. But okay, so anyway, we will go ahead and start our panel today. So I was asked a couple weeks ago to organize a panel on the effects of COVID on our field and the people in our field. And so I tried to get a set of people who could speak to various issues. And so I'll introduce the panel. I'll start on Zoom. We have Professor Shonda Prescott-Weinstein, who is professor at New Hampshire University in physics and women's studies. Then we also have Professor Meenakshi Rain, who is a professor and now chair of Brown University. We have Dr. Kathy Turner from the Department of Energy. We have Dr. Dmitry Denisov, who is associate head of the Brookhaven Laboratory. We have Dr. Robert Bernstein, who is a senior scientist and current co-spokesman, I believe, for Mu-to-E. And then we have a graduate student, Amber Roper-Greer, who is at George Mason University. And finally, we have Professor Elizabeth Simmons, who is a professor at UC San Diego and also vice chancellor there. So I had prepared a set of questions that we'll address to the panel. And then I wanted to leave a fair amount of time for discussion with the audience. Since we have a fairly small audience today, hopefully we can get some lively discussion. So the first question is to Amber. So could you speak to some of the challenges you or others you know have faced during the pandemic in the rather sudden shift and then prolonged upset to our normal lives? In particular, early career researchers can unequally be affected by these events. How has this affected your life, family, and career?
Yeah, thank you so much. So when the pandemic hit, I was actually doing research on Fermilab campus, and we received an email saying that I could possibly not even be allowed to fly back home. So that was very jarring right from the beginning. But as I've been talking with my classmates and with my colleagues, there's something that there was a trend that I noticed. You know, as grad students, we are on the lower end of the totem pole. We don't get as much pay, of course. And this necessarily means that we didn't have access to additional measures in order to keep us safe. You know, we don't get paid enough to get groceries delivered. We don't get paid enough to set up a nice home office for us to do our work in. And so as far as research goes, I was an experimentalist on Atlas, and uniquely, you know, all of my research was virtual already. So that's not the aspect that really changed the dynamic for me. In particular, the aspect that affected me very deeply was not being able to see my classmates in being in a position where having a community of cohorts allows us to survive graduate school, essentially. I'm sure a lot of us in the room remember commiserating with your fellow classmates and being able to get through the tough time that is graduate school. And it's incredibly difficult to do so when you can't see each other. We can try to emulate this on Zoom. We've tried all of this with conferences and whatnot, and we know it's not the same. And being thrown into that in such a vulnerable state was jarring for a lot of us students. One of the things that came out of this is that we really need to listen to those who don't have the power in the room, because we had to collectively, as graduate students, ask for a virtual option for our qualifiers because the people running them didn't think to do that, right? This is in a time where we're all incredibly scared for our lives and our families' lives. And we had no choice but to fight in a situation where we shouldn't have had to. So those are kind of the main lessons that I've kind of learned from a graduate student perspective.
Thank you. Is there any other comments on that panel? Okay, if not, the second question will go to Shonda. so who is on Zoom, as you can see. So unfortunately, the most marginalized individuals often suffer the worst consequences of events like this. Can you speak to how we can address these systemic problems in our field and help to rectify these unequal effects?
Yeah, I should start by correcting you. It's Chanda, it's a hard CH.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that part of what was just captured in what Amber just said, what they said is really important. Graduate students are in a lot of ways the canaries in the coal mine, unfortunately, for problems in academia. And I was just thinking this morning that if we made things better for graduate students, it would literally just be a better workplace for pretty much everybody. And so I think that this entire experience has really hit that home. And so, of course, all of the problems that people from underrepresented backgrounds face, both within the laboratory and in their lives outside of the laboratory, and I mean that broadly, I'm a theorist, right? That all gets heightened and so we saw, for example, incredible disparities in racial disparities in which communities were hit hardest with deaths. And, you know, people having to deal with that while also trying to navigate being students, being faculty, being caregivers in a variety of ways, while also being students, being faculty, or being postdocs. I'm beaming into you all virtually because I got COVID, and luckily I'm testing negatively. I'm still feeling some of the physical effects, even though I realize that doesn't necessarily transmit well over Zoom. And so I can say from personal experience that one of the very direct impacts that has had on me is it means that I'm not submitting an NSF career this year. That's a really big thing for me in my professional timeline. So what does that have to do with underrepresented minority experiences? Well, I want to encourage people. There's a new paper that just came out. It was being circulated on social media about racial disparities in who gets NSF grants. And so I want people to think about what it means for those of us from underrepresented minority backgrounds to find ourselves in a situation where we are even less equipped than we already were to overcome structural barriers in terms of accessing resources that are supposed to be broadly and equitably available to the community. So I'm very aware of the fact that me not applying for the NSF career actually puts a significant dent in the percentage of Black PIs who are submitting NSF grants and NSF careers this year. And that pressure just becomes bigger when you're from an underrepresented minority background. It obviously broadly impacts people. I want to particularly point to people who have caregiving responsibilities and remind folks that people from underrepresented backgrounds are more likely to be in intergenerational households. So when I say caregiving, I don't just mean parents, I also mean people who have elders who are doing elder care. And the pressures that we have all faced to be in in-person classrooms, sometimes without mask mandates. Some of us who are in states like New Hampshire, where vaccine mandates are outlawed, means that we are not only taking on our own personal safety and risk when we go into the classroom, but are facing scenarios where we're choosing between the health and well-being of vulnerable people in our households and ourselves. And again, all of that gets heightened when we are from underrepresented backgrounds. What I would like to see is a plan and a push from the physics community, the particle physics community, but also within agencies to see how that's going to be addressed, including, for example, like really basic stuff, like instead of asking people to use part of their 15 pages to write an COVID impact statement, people need to be given a separate page for the COVID impact statement. So they're not choosing between their science and explaining why they didn't publish as much. I have a colleague who got dinged for that on the career last year, and it was really disgusting, actually. So there are really like very basic things that, again, they're going to impact everybody who is living through this pandemic, but assume that it gets heightened for anybody who's from an underrepresented background, and that should be interpreted broadly.
Great, thank you very much for those replies. Are there any other comments people would like to make, or? Okay, if not, we'll go on to the next question, which is for Meenakshi. So HEP research has suffered delays from work which could not be done due to COVID protocols or people being sick, or working at reduced capacity due to greater than usual demands for family care, et cetera. Given that we are in the third year and at least the sixth wave of the pandemic, what lessons can be learned in being able to move forward in a way that is safe, humane, and addresses the issues discussed within the previous questions and answers?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Kevin, and thanks for inviting me for being on the panel and commenting on the impact on HEP research. Before I go on to that, I'd like to acknowledge what both previously Amber and Chanda have said, that while the entire community has suffered, there are segments of our society who are less privileged and have been impacted more. And personally, I found myself in a place where it was difficult to not only process my own issues, but the added intense emotional stress which came from wanting to help my group members, people in the department, and everything. And I know it became overwhelming for me, and I know that others in this room probably have also struggled one way or the other. And so it has impacted all our research. And as we are coming out of this, hopefully the pandemic, and it's the sixth wave or whatever waves, but they're milder, we are vaccinated, et cetera, so we can deal with it a little bit better. But before even the pandemic, the way we did most of our HEP collaboration in international collaborations was via video conferencing. So we were kind of used to it. But the proliferation of Zoom kind of 24/7 in our lives to do everything really impacted at least our human side very substantially as we endured anxiety or insanity and isolation. And that kind of trying to connect as a human to others in that virtual world taught us a lot of things. And we learned from our experiences, and we're learning from our experiences continually. And so from my experiences and from talking to our collaborators and seeing how we are now doing business, at least in large collaborations and even in our group research environments right now, I think as we move forward, how do we move forward in a way, as Kevin put it, safe and humane? And I think that is the two key words here, which I'd like to address. And for me, it's like 3 points. One is to address the elephant in Zoom. How do we restart safe in-person meetings? And how do we configure our spaces in which we meet? So starting with Zoom, which is our favorite one. You know, universities have started full force in-person mode, and research has started, at least at the universities, full in-person mode. And in large collaborations, it's more true for the US universities than the labs. Labs still have higher restrictions than the universities. And so more of our research, local research group meetings are more in person, still hybrid mode. We all live in hybrid mode. But even though the international research meetings are in a hybrid mode, they are still very Zoom heavy because of the travel restrictions and health issues and safeties. So, and most often we still find ourselves, as we are getting out of the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, back-to-back meetings with 0 minutes to spare, switch between Zoom links. So I always have to apologize. Oh, I was in that meeting. I'm 3 minutes late here, can never start on time, right? So to move forward, we need to make some major tweaks in our Zoom culture ourselves. And some of them are being made. And so, what I've learned that for small group meetings, at least in our research group meetings, where we know each other a little bit better and a more friendly atmosphere, check in with each other either at the beginning or at the end of the meeting helps with all our mental health and getting to know each other. And then the other ones are more operational. So what I've learned from my university, for all the meetings either start just like in research meeting on the hour, on the half hour, make it 50 minutes instead of 1 hour. And keep the agenda shorter. And so you have that 10 minutes to decompress to think about your next meeting, to take notes, whatever you want. It's like walking between classes and you decompress. That's what the atmosphere we should try to make. And that helps us de-stress. Oh, I'm late for another meeting. And really, it gets me stressed when I'm late. And the other is record and caption big meetings, because there are going to be people who will have other obligations due to COVID, due to other sicknesses or loved one care. And we have this technology, we're getting used to it. So that's a good part. Let's continue with it. And another thing which I've also learned over time here is to encourage who are maybe working from home due to some reason. Sometimes they decline to give a presentation because of the background issues, childcare issues, whatever issues they may have. And so asking them to pre-record and post the meeting so they feel they're participating and they could be there for Q&A. It helps also others to think about what to ask, etc. So those were a few little things in Zoom. For restarting safe in-person meeting, the human side of us is social. Even we are quirky physicists, we don't want to talk to each other. We don't want to acknowledge that we are more than professional. We have a human side, that happens in our meetings quite often, and also in teaching, right? So we have difficulty acknowledging our human emotional aspect, but we should try to sort of engage with each other so we get to know each other. And that's really important. And that comes out more in the in-person side. And this week, I see people, even though they're complaining about the intense level of snow mass, and in snow mass, there are many, many different directions everybody goes to. There's a lot of tension, but they're really happy. They're happy to be here. We're meeting each other. And that really helps us in terms of doing our research and being innovative. And also in-person meetings are efficient. If you have, sometimes if there's a case of too many emails and many Zoom meetings and it's stifling productivity, ask for an in-person meeting. But while I'm saying emphasizing in-person meetings, they have to be in safe environment. And basically in spaces which are open and with masks, they are very important. And whether in person or in Zoom, don't hesitate to ask yourself and others if the meeting is absolutely necessary. I think we have too many meetings. At least I have sometimes too many meetings. And sometimes they're really not necessary, or maybe your presence is not necessary. Look out for yourself. And then for the last thing, which I wanted to comment on spaces, in hybrid mode of work, many people will be a few days from home if that's what they choose to be. And this is going to be our lives moving forward. And this is quite in line with our daily HEP research. I think we used to do that even prior to pandemic. But when you come to work, make sure that you ask for spaces which are ventilated, have the option of social distancing if needed, and depending on your comfort level. And universities are doing that because they've opened classrooms, they've restructured classroom, many of them have invested in this. But many universities I talking to about, people have not invested in research spaces and making them better. Our students may be crammed in one big room. So I think we have to start thinking about reconfiguring those, making them safer, even for our meetings, which are in person. And this is something which we should strive for, whether we are university and lab. And so that's basically most of what I wanted to touch upon. And we need a lot of flexibility, and we need to be creative in proposing these solutions. So thanks.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Gordon?
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Chanda, that's fine.
Yeah, so something that I thought of, which I love those suggestions about, offering people the flexibility. One thing that I do a lot of shadow mentoring with Black students who are not students at University of New Hampshire, but are at other institutions. And a consistent pattern that I have seen, although, just because there's a pattern doesn't mean it's true for everybody. We all know that this is how it works with data. But a consistent pattern that I saw is that the students felt safer when their classes were virtual because they worried a lot less about experiencing microaggressions in the classroom. I definitely saw a couple of situations where the student performance tanked when they went back to in-person learning because of the stress of the combination of dealing with in-person COVID threats and also because of the threats of dealing with racism and sexism and other forms of bias in the classrooms. I am a person who believes really strongly about the value of in-person interaction, but I do actually think that one of the lessons that we've learned over this pandemic is that offering people that flexibility also builds in an opportunity for people from underrepresented backgrounds to choose the circumstances under which they participate and get their educations in a way that allows them to focus on actually getting the science and the work done. And sometimes that's actually not in person for some people.
Sure.
So Chanda, you mentioned, having these options really helps those who are from underrepresented groups. And I wanted to add that, I was able to attend conferences and present on my science in places that I never would have had the opportunity to if we weren't virtual. So that has been one aspect of this that has been personally positive for me. It was free for me to attend virtually, and I was able to have the space to talk about my science. So there has been the ability to have options like this has had a great impact on those. And I just wanted to make that was known.
Yeah. Okay, so, oh, sorry.
With regard to the question of the mode of teaching, whether it's in person or virtual or hybrid, I would just note that one has to also consider the impact on the faculty who are doing the teaching. In my position, I hear a lot from the faculty as well as the students, and the faculty have noted that it's much more straightforward to teach either in person completely or remote completely, and that trying to do a class hybrid can be difficult, challenging, a lot more work. And so that's something else that has to be taken into account in trying to figure out how to keep the universities working for everybody somehow.
Okay. So a couple of things came to mind while you were discussing your 3 points, Meenakshi. So one for the Zoom is one of the beauties about our culture is that we are not a banking culture. We don't need to always dress in ties. We're extremely informal. And I have been invited into so many people's houses because of COVID-19 via the Zoom. It's been fantastic. I've seen many pets. I've seen kids. And I think that feels like it's sort of becoming a new normal. It should just be the new normal, that we are not expecting, especially in Zoom, that we have some, set aside gorgeous place. We're all in suits and ties and any distractions in life aren't there. And we already work too hard. That's a whole nother issue. But having a little bit of life on the work side, as well as, of course, some work on the life side, sadly, but I think is completely appropriate. And I've actually really liked it. I enjoy seeing all of this, all of people's, real side. The other thing was you were talking about when should meetings be in person and when should they be Zoom, and we should just ask if you don't feel comfortable. And that's something that I can do. That's something you can do. But I think that's also something lots of people don't feel comfortable doing. We need to figure out a better way to make that okay. And your comment about let's do 50 minutes instead of an hour, that's a real culture change. You see me here at this conference, I'm constantly coming down into the well and staring at people to get them to sort of stick on time. The last thing is that when I'm at CERN and I go to meetings, many of these meetings I go to, and about 50% of the people are there on their laptops typing away in the meeting. And I think there's probably a message hidden in that.
want to say this, maybe I can just say it. There's a comment on Zoom about how to implement hybrid in a fair way, one needs institutional support. And so I was wondering if anybody wants to follow up on that.
I mean, I'm happy to expand on the comment since I'm the one who made it, if nobody else wants to. I actually found myself in a situation last fall where we had a a COVID exposure a few days before classes started. And so the night before classes started, I had students emailing me telling me that they didn't feel safe coming to class. I simultaneously found myself in a situation where the university had mandated that absolutely no classes could be offered hybrid. So as an assistant professor who is pre-tenure, I made the executive decision to go into my classroom using my own tools to figure out how to make the class hybrid. And then I did it. And I informed my entire department that I had done this in violation of university policy. That was a risk that I had to take for both the safety of my students and to ensure that there was equitable access to the class. That's one example. I know that there are all kinds of examples across the country of situations where faculty were overworked and there was pressure both from the administration to keep students happy and from students to offer all of the options, and no resources were being put in our laps to ensure that we had the additional support to make that happen. And so I think that it's true that we faculty were extraordinarily unhappy, and we were also getting blamed a lot for the unhappiness of students, threats about, what happens if students withdraw and then we don't have tuition money and then the university doesn't have any money anymore. The amount that we were asked to carry psychologically and socially and economically for universities was enormous. And at no point did I really see any open discussion from administrations that this was an unfair load that was being put on faculty. And it may be that it was because administrators didn't have the resources to solve the problem, but they at least could have openly said, we know that this isn't fair to faculty. I understand why that didn't happen at University of New Hampshire, because we are unionized and there was no way that they were going to give the union something like that. And really what it came down to was that they put money ahead of being honest about the situation that faculty were being put in. So I agree that hybrid didn't necessarily go great for everybody, but I think that that was because we weren't given the resources to make it what it could have been, including, for example, extra TAs. Extra TAs would have made a huge difference and provided more support for graduate students, particularly if they were equitably paid. But that piece of the conversation needs to be addressed, that faculty were asked to carry the university. And by faculty, I also mean graduate student instructors, just to be clear.
This is Dmitry Denisov. Look, I'm representing National Labs, and it was actually on my list, so it will help me sort of to reduce items I'm discussing about hybrid meetings. I think that all of us realized, like including for this meeting, that hybrid collaboration activities are very positive. So at many labs, various equipment was installed in order to improve hybrid meetings. The culture changed so that as we can see from this meeting, when people who are on Zoom have sort of easy access to provide feedback, to ask questions. I think it's very important. And at the same time, for example, we had to deal with various collaborations meeting, which typically happening at the labs. And again, we developed various tools. We developed, for example, accounting. In some cases, like number of people in the room must be limited to some guidances by various agencies. And we again develop way of monitoring how many people can come and look who will be connecting remotely. So I think, again, it's certainly challenging time, but the goals of the universities and the labs is still to make life as productive and as culturally stable as possible.
Thanks. I also had noticed that there are some comments on the Zoom chat that we can't really see here in the room. So I wanted to give anyone who is on Zoom an opportunity to raise their hand and if they wanted to make a comment. Okay, go ahead. You.
Yeah, this is related to Chanda's point and Amber's point. So I want to speak from the perspective of people with invisible disabilities. During the pandemic, it's very hard to receive any necessary support. And I actually had to ask the Fermilab HR for the accommodation. And it actually is helpful. So for the individuals, sometimes I know we will have hesitancy to talk to HR, but sometimes it's helpful. And when everything falls apart, I think that's a route that we can try to take. And another thing is there is basically no open representation or no representation of people who are open about their invisible disability. So it's hard to know which PI I can ask for help when the direct supervisor, they cannot, or they don't know if they don't want to help. Then I think HR is the only way. So it would be very important to increase the representation of people who are openly about their invisible disabilities. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Aaron, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'll just state the question that I put in the document. We've learned a lot about our capabilities to accommodate disabled and immunocompromised students and trainees during COVID. Specifically how quickly we moved online, which is something that disabled students have been asking as a reasonable accommodation long before COVID. We do know that long COVID is going to impact our communities at each of our levels, local, international. And I wanted to pose the question, which is related here, is how are we as a community preparing to accommodate this new group of disabled physicists?
So one of the things that we've been working on in the community engagement frontier is exactly this, but really more in terms of, we framed it in terms of conferences because, like, particularly Snowmass is a huge workshop, and we know that there has been a lot of historical issues for physicists who with disabilities and their ability to interact fully and in the moment in conferences, and COVID just exacerbates this. So we performed some community-wide surveys, and I was even able to run some preliminary analysis and to really get an idea of the actual lived experiences of our disabled colleagues and how this truly has affected their ability to participate. And there were far too many responses telling us that they've been effectively barred from at least 40% of Snowmass because of this. And these issues should not have taken a global pandemic for us to pay attention to this. I want to say that first and foremost. But we are working to increase the visibility of the fact that these are necessary accommodations, and these are things that allow us to all participate in things such as this, which is community-wide. And if we're not providing accommodations for our colleagues, then we are not letting them do physics with us, and it's just wrong in my opinion. But I think from my perspective, the first step is to ensure that everyone becomes aware of this, and we can then, tap into our human empathy and start making this better for our colleagues.
Elizabeth, you wanted to comment?
Yes, I'd like to build on what several colleagues have said by reminding us that there are individuals who would describe themselves as having, say, a mental health condition or being neurodivergent, for whom Zoom and being remote is not necessarily ideal. It can exacerbate feelings of anxiety, isolation, depression, and for some people, it really does not work. So we have to really be careful to not say everybody who has a condition that might be described in some way as a disability needs the same thing. So we have to be careful to be flexible, and as you say, looking to, and as Chanda said, looking to the different lived experiences of different people to figure out how to really be inclusive.
I think Young Ki wanted to make a comment. Right, center.
Thank you for all the questions and comments. And I would like to also build on what already said. But also the time zones are very different. So make sure that we should be aware. We ended up meeting early morning to late night because of that. And I think that's something, another aspect we have to be very cautious when we schedule hybrid meetings or Zoom meetings. One thing that Meenakshi said about 1 hour meeting is a 50 minutes, and I had that problem. And as we know, that it was a really problem. Golden said we don't know what to do, but we many of us teach 50 minutes lecture, so we know how to do it. And all of you, us, have done 50-minute lecture when we were students. So I think we know what to do if we decide to do. So I think that's something in many ways it's gonna really be helpful for everybody.
Thank you. There's one more hand up on Zoom, Amanda.
Thank you. Can people hear me? Okay, great. So I just wanted to follow up on some of the prior comments that people have made and heartily second some of what has been said, but to also comment that when we talk about, going hybrid for meetings, for conferences, for teaching, as a long-term solution to some of these issues, that is a really important aspect, I think, for many of us. I am, an associate professor. I'm also immunocompromised. In the last 2 years, the intersection, both of the accessibility of meetings, but also the intersection of my health status and what it meant for the availability of childcare, meant that simply the available free time that I had to give to this process was severely limited. So when we talk about these impacts, I think there are the issues of direct accessibility, but I think we also have to be aware as well that there are going to be many people in the community who are at stages of their lives that meant that they were paying additional unseen prices. And we as a community have to figure out how we're going to address those sorts of situations going forward in an equitable way. It's not as simple as just ensuring that we do one set of things that mean meetings are on the face of it accessible. I think we also have to be aware how we are structuring certain incentives within the community and certain processes within the community in order to account for the fact that not everyone with the same disability will actually experience the same impact in the same way. It's a function of what your university was doing. It was a function of what type of state you were living in. It was a function of, what other aspects of your life were complicated by your health condition with respect to COVID. So I do think that as we talk about these things going forward, I wanted to speak up, at least in part, because a couple of more junior speakers had talked about not knowing who to go to or who to talk to. And I wanted to sort of comment that this isn't just an issue for the junior people. There are senior people who are experiencing this as well. And I think it's time for us to be more public and more open about it, because people need to hear that we exist and we're there. But I also think it's very important to realize that even if we solve these problems, there will be additional issues going forward in terms of how do we do equitable faculty searches when there's a COVID surge? How do we do anything that puts pressure on people who may not feel comfortable disclosing to ask for accommodation? It's, there will be situations that I don't think we've figured out how to navigate yet, even once we solve the hybrid problem. The hybrid accommodations are necessary, but I don't think they're going to be sufficient.
Thank you for those important comments. I'd like to return to the panel just to ask Bob a question. So in a similar way, HEP projects have suffered delays from work, and in the same way that research has. And I wonder if you could comment from your unique perspective of being in charge of one of these projects.
Sure. Before I say anything else, so I'm not at a university, I'm at a lab. And so I have a very different set of things that I know about. I'm also like a super privileged white guy. So I'm not even going to talk about any of the things that I heard about it. And it's not because I think it's important. It's that my opinion about it isn't important. So I'm going to stick to the things that I see trying to run an experiment and a project at a lab. And the first thing, so I talked to a bunch of project managers, and the first thing that we figured out is that our whole culture of meetings is totally messed up, which we all know, but I wrote it all down and took notes and then checked that everybody thought the same thing. So, the meeting schedule is basically used as an excuse to pretend we're doing work. Half the time there's no purpose to the meeting. Half the time there's no agenda. People keep talking for self-aggrandizement, and we keep going after the meetings like not serving any useful purpose. Another thing that I hear over and over is that the Zoom schedule is so stressful. I've heard this from a couple people that we should start adding mental health days to comp packages, and that you shouldn't have to take it out of your vacation. People get really burned out being on Zoom. Or pretending to be useful. I loved what Gordon said. My entire career, since there's been email, I look at the audience and half the people are on email. So what are you doing there? How important can the meeting be? So anyway, let me come back to the mental health day. That's something that I heard from several managers that they thought that would be a really good idea. Another thing is more flex time. If you're not sitting in a useful Zoom meeting and it's more convenient for you to work, odd hours or different hours, then just go ahead and do it. And that's a big deal for people with caregiving responsibilities. I want to say one thing about social issues. So I just started sort of informally while I was sitting in these endless Zoom meetings, paying attention to when there was some crisis in the household, who got up and took care of it, right? And I started noticing, the women are always getting up and dealing with the kids, and the guys are going, can you handle that? Can you handle that? So we got to stop. We got to knock that off. The other thing that I heard over and over again is that we're not empowering technicians to replan their activities. So there's been a lot of changes to the working conditions. And usually what happens is that somebody up here who has no idea what's going on makes a decision that gets pushed down. And so we need to start engaging, and I think this includes graduate students as well as technicians, and postdocs as well as technicians, and undergrads as well as technicians, in figuring out how to do things instead of it coming from top down. We need to pull them in and figure out the most efficient way to run things. And I think that's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you. So this next question is a similar question for Elizabeth. What can academic leaders do to help alleviate these issues, and what constraints they have, and how we can take steps to deal with these ongoing issues?
Thanks very much. I appreciate the chance to be part of this very lively discussion. So let me start by building on what Bob said. We have to pay overall attention to culture and process as we're trying to work on these COVID issues. We have to ask widely what people's experiences are, including asking marginalized academics and staff what's impacting them the most, so that we will make long-term progress on having the university really be an inclusive place where employees and students feel supported. So with that as background, I wanted to mention a few things that universities can do, universities have been doing. I can't tell you every university has been doing these things. I can say UC San Diego, where I am, has been doing these. Many of the UCs, I'm sure there are many other universities that have done similar things, but just as points to think about, I'll group them in a couple into a couple categories. One thing is time clock extensions, such as automatic extension of the tenure clock or automatic extension on limits on the number of terms that a graduate student is allowed to be a TA. So where we have these artificial time clocks, we should think about, yeah, maybe this is a time when adding an extra year on is better for everybody, at least having that, giving the person the option. Another thing that can and has been done is repurposing existing resources. For example, if there's a mechanism for internal research bridging grants, that can be extended to allow COVID-related delays or COVID-related situations to be a reason for being eligible for these bridge grants. Similarly, internal travel grants can and have been extended to be allowed for, instead of travel per se, if the conference you're going to be going to is online, maybe you need some extra dependent care to let you actually focus on being at the conference instead of trying to look after whomever during those hours. Modified duties programs that have typically been for situations where a new child is joining a household can be extended, again, for COVID-related dependent care duties. And where there are things like a teaching and learning center on campus, it can be shifted or extended to support digital learning in a number of ways. So a lot of the time, if you have resources and you extend how they can be used, that can be a lot easier for many reasons than trying to come up with some brand new program that you've never run before. You can do it much faster, people understand, and there's a lot of flexibility. Making investments in tech is clearly something that needs to happen. Examples would be installing automatic podcasting equipment in classrooms. So literally the instructor walks in, they push a button, and as they give the class, it will be recorded. And then at the end of the class, they push a button and the podcast will be uploaded, and students who couldn't be there, or students who just want to watch the lecture again or want to watch the discussion again, can do so. And that can take a lot of burden off of people. All you have to do is push a button if it's designed well. Funding tech liaisons for departments, we did that, figuring there's probably one person, a faculty member or grad student in the department who actually is very comfortable with tech and would like to help their colleagues. So we paid them. And that way, there'd be one person per department who said, yes, I'll take a bit of extra money and help my fellows who are less conversant with the technology. Modifications to academic review processes, like having COVID impact statements, but just telling everybody, just put it in your file, whatever it says, but then telling the reviewers, you need to read that and take it into account and actually consider achievement relative to opportunity when reading review, promotion, and tenure files. For example, was somebody asked to give a major keynote address at a conference that was canceled early in the pandemic. Okay, it's not the person's fault it was canceled. They got the honor of being asked. That ought to be good enough under this circumstance. There are fields where review of manuscripts was delayed due to the pandemic. Take that into account when thinking about publishing rates. Or tenure files, we've done this on my campus. If there's a tenure file that's on the bubble, you can't tell, will the person get tenure or not? We normally have a deadline of October 15th, where if your only publications or grants or whatever that happened before October 15th of your tenure review year can go in your file. But if the file is on the bubble and before the 15th, you had submitted the grants and the papers, and they are just out there waiting to be reviewed, we said, okay, we will wait till we hear what happened with those, if that's going to make a difference in the file. So trying to have ways to give flexibility, to give some grace, to say, for the long term, it's more important that we make sure that people not be artificially impacted because of when they were junior in their career. Many other examples one could give, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. So I also wanted to ask Kathy if you could talk a little bit about the steps the funding agencies have taken to help mitigate the effects on people and projects in terms of providing flexibility or funds, and also about some of the constraints of you having to deal with real backstops of real budgets and things like that in the situation.
Okay. So yeah, first I did want to say I've actually really enjoyed this because I'm, I deal with certain groups in the field. I manage the Cosmic Frontier at Department of Energy, but I've learned a lot of different things coming from different people. So it's been very helpful today. And I know we've all been affected, personally, myself too, and careers, the whole field, and people have actually, a lot of people now have had the illness, and I've heard worse cases. And I've heard a lot about a Zoom. I think Zoom has affected us all. But I want to talk about what Department of Energy is doing. And again, so I interact primarily with faculty members that fund their grants. So I don't interact with the postdocs or students as much directly, unless I'm at a meeting or a conference or something. And so over Zoom, it's been hard to do that kind of thing. And I also work with lab management and management of the projects or the operational teams. But what we've done within DOE overall, and this is coming from Office of Science, and so we are following all the DOE guidelines, of course, but we're trying to give maximum flexibility. And to our research, what that means is if a PI, faculty member, needs additional time to carry out their work, or they need us to say, it's okay to fund your postdoc an extra year or your graduate student an extra year, whatever that means, we're giving maximum flexibility. It's a case-by-case basis, but I certainly have not turned anybody down, and my colleagues have not either. But the case also is, yes, we didn't get additional funds. So, a faculty member may have to fund their postdoc an extra year or 2 years to get to where their career would have been, but that then maybe can't take on another postdoc. So I know what has happened, and same with the students. I know what has happened. Happened to my daughter too. It's disrupted your career, and it's disrupted the pipeline too, in addition to all the detailed personal things. But really, I just wanted to say we are giving maximum flexibility for grants, for research efforts. If you or your colleagues have issues, please let us know. I've written letters for people that they can take back to their department, that they need, to have their students additional time or whatever. For our projects, we have had to adjust a lot of the projects. Some of the projects were already operating, and many operated primarily remotely, and so weren't as affected as much. But we have a lot that were near completion in terms of near, what we have a CD4. But because of COVID, it was very, on the fence if they would be able to complete on time and successfully. So what we did is we completed them. Every project has a threshold and a higher level of what they're supposed to achieve. So we would complete them on the threshold level and move some of the more higher objectives to the operations funding, which can be extended much more. It's not as rigid. We had other projects that were earlier in their phase that were affected by COVID, and they had to actually be rebaseligned. So, we are working with each individually, and each project, each lab, each grant to get, we all want to do the best that we can for the field. And so we're working on that. I did want to say something about Zoom. I know because everybody is, yeah, it's been really draining on all of us. Of course, Zoom, we all used Zoom before, and it was good because then you could meet with people without having to go there, and keep a lot of things going. But, it's been one of those things that for every good thing, there's a bad thing. So, I've noticed that some people over the pandemic are alone. Some people were alone in an apartment, if they didn't have a partner or family, they're alone. And it can be very difficult emotionally and mentally. And so they're needing more interaction. So like people say, oh, I can't stand to stay on Zoom all the time. But I feel some people are like grabbing for more to talk more. And or people that just are people, persons that want to be out interacting, they would want to talk more. Others are being really drained because they want to go in and focus, get the thing done and get back off of it. So it's like everything, it's good for some and not for others. So I'm just talking personal experience. But it does seem Zoom has really proliferated. And often I go through entire days, it seems like, on Zoom the whole time. And then I start my work after. So I know a lot of people are like this. So anyway, yeah, so I just want to end where we are trying to be maximally flexible. If you have any issues, please let us know. Me or the other program managers.
I could just add something to that. So first of all, I have found the agencies, I interact with Brian Beckford's office a lot, have been incredibly helpful. And the whole Office of Science, with the whole, because there's constructive interference effects in the bad direction between supply chain disruptions and inabilities to meet. And you guys have been like really understanding. I do want to say one thing about something you said about, need for social interaction. So we tried having informal Zoom meetings where people were just supposed to chat for social interactions. And what happens is that, I want to say people like me just take over those meetings and then just broadcast. And then people who really need to socially interact just don't get to talk. And so I think we tried that and it's been an utter failure. I don't know what to do. It's a good point. I agree with you, but I don't know what to do about it.
Well,
I can only measure if I'm in the room, Gordon.
That's what, you can do also like a meeting where you make sure that everybody gets their minute to speak. So, and that you can have a moderator of the coffee hour. I've run grant reviews where I've seen old friends that I haven't seen in years and because of COVID. And we've just agreed, people go out for a beer at the end of the night. We've all just gotten our beer and sat there and chit chatted for a couple hours after the review in the evening, as we would have in person. So that's been nice.
So Chanda also has her hand up. You can't see it because you're facing this way, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Zoom's not a good format for socializing. It's not structured that way. There are other online formats for that. So I've seen GatherTown used successfully for conferences. I also know that departments built entire gather spaces so that people can hang out. And I think that what we should be pushing for is for those kinds of services to become better so that they can do the things that we need them to do. Claire is noting in the chat here that it has accessibility issues. So there are things that we can be doing to make spaces virtually. And Zoom doesn't have to be the catch-all. So I think that has to be something that we think about, which is like also particularly as we're incentivizing interdisciplinary work and people building new tools to enable science, that tools that we could have to enable science is actually spaces that are GatherTown-like, that have the accessibility issues addressed, for example. That's an actual tool that if someone built that, we would benefit enormously from it.
So thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut off, but I want to give Dimitri also a chance to talk today. So the final question, then we can open it up for more discussion, is, if Dimitri could speak to what lab leaders have been doing to help alleviate these issues and particular struggles that labs have been having over this pandemic.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for inviting. So I will be talking for national labs, and as you all know, so labs are also affected, yes, so as all of us by COVID. An example is that look at BNL as of last week, we had over the length of pandemic, more than 2 years, is 1,000 cases for 2,500 employees. So that sets the scale of the challenge. And while I will be talking mainly with BNL examples, just because I'm coming from this lab, I really appreciate help from all labs leadership for providing me with some useful points, which I would like to make during this brief presentation. So, of course, look, in terms of effects, reduced access to the labs, both for the staff and users, was one of the major concerns of the COVID. Shutdown of large facilities, like, for example, at BNL, we had to shut down within a very short period of time in spring of 2020, the relativistic heavy ion collider. Luckily, we did restart it later in the summer, but it was certainly a very challenging operation. So there is strong effects on projects, operations, research, and including travel. We, for almost 2 years, were not able to travel, yes, so especially internationally. So, of course, young scientists, as many mentioned here, are affected especially, including at the labs. So, and for example, we had to shut down some of the child care facilities. So as a result, of course, young parents had to now find ways of caring for their children at the same time as doing their day jobs, yeah, even if over Zoom. I also wanted to mention that, look, there was a very serious challenge for our foreign members of staff, because quite a few of them coming from various countries were not able to go home even for a short period of time. And in some cases, those who had to have visas, they couldn't go back because US consulates were closed in other countries for a very extended period of times, and they needed stamps in their passports to come back. So there were very challenging situations for many of ours. Of course, you will ask what's the additional challenge for the lab, and I would briefly say, look, following multiple rules and regulations which are coming from other sides, as well as from inside the lab. So that's probably was the main sort of challenge. So how we are minimizing effects? So let me start from making very clear statements. It's our main goal is safety, safety of our staff, safety of our visitors, of everyone who coming. So whatever we are doing, the safety is first. So we don't want to have anyone not to have serious effects of COVID. So close communication with various authorities was very important, like labs were sending mails twice a week to all the staffs and users, look, what's going on, what's the plans, what's the situation. We were very pleased to receive from the Department of Energy last year in 2021, the COVID safety plan, which outlined sort of specific actions at different levels of COVID, because before it was sort of chaotic. And this safety plan is actually helping greatly because it defines what and when has to be done. And of course, there was very close, and there is very close cooperation between different labs. Our chief operating officers was sort of meeting sometime daily to share information, to share how sort of effects of COVID could be reduced, and that then propagated in each of the labs. As already was mentioned, the effect of young scientists was especially negative. So what we were trying to do in various places, for example, in late 2020, when effectively the access to the lab was closed except for very essential personnel. So we managed to agree with the labs that, look, postdocs can come at least one day a week for like a few hours to meet with their mentors, so that there could be face-to-face with masks and other precautions interactions. So because that's appeared to be very, very useful. And of course, we have, for example, developed various mentoring programs when the younger scientists can work with more senior staff hope sometime in person, sometime over Zoom, in order to alleviate some of the problems which were mentioned here already. So by now, situation is, as we all know, look, we're having this meeting, so it's better defined and understood. Access to the labs is in most cases allowed, but don't take my word for granted. So check before you come, because things might change pretty quickly. Accelerators and other facilities are mainly running on schedule, as many of you are coming to Fermilab Test Beam, for example, so which is a unique opportunity. Travel, including international, is mainly restarted, so the lab employees, staff can visit. And I would say what's very also important is we have to thank Department of Energy for rebaselining some of our projects, which became more expensive due to COVID, extra funding to handle operations and the research programs in order to stabilize situation. And by now, I think it's mainly now worked well. So COVID is not over yet, as we all know. So we are all in masks, yes, but we really learning how to operate in this new normal. And of course, labs is part of this system, sort of, to make all of that work. Thank you.
So speaking of Zoom breaks and things like this, I do want to give people, a break before the next session. But are there any last comments anyone in the room or on Zoom would like to make? Gordon?
Thanks. Actually, this is more just a process comment. I was curious, is everything that was talked about here, is that going to end up somewhere in a report or a panel, or is this just a discussion in the ether? This certainly has all been recorded, and the chat has been saved, and it will get posted on our site. But I was wondering if there was something else this is building towards.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Mu Chun Chen. I'm the DEI topical group convener, co-convener. Actually, we have two relevant white papers. One is on the wellness, personal wellness and mental health, so that address also the mental health conditions. Another one which, and also work-life balance. So there's a discussion on also COVID impact. Another two relevant one is on the accessibility, which is relevant again to persons with disability, both visible and invisible. In another white paper, how to support marginalized community members, there's an expanded discussion on neurodiversity, supporting persons with disability, both visible and invisible. So if there's any additional, so really welcome the community to take a look. And if there's any additional comments, any aspect that you would like us to include, please let us know.
Thank you.
Wow, that was. I think we should end otherwise with the hearing. What Dimitri has said just occurred to me that something that I want to comment, especially our international students and postdocs. They don't have their family members in US, so even now there's some countries require quarantine, so they cannot really go back. So we would like to make sure that we have to also think about special needs for our students, especially those who cannot easily go home and come back.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd just like to again thank our distinguished panel for both accepting to be on this panel very, very late and also to join us here on their Sunday lunch. So thank you very much.